Shalom, welcome back. So we are going to continue on with our study of the Rock of a Sure Foundation. We're up to the section on the Nazarene Acts of the Apostles. So typically, if you were to research this document and you wanted to read some scholarly papers on it, you would have to do a search for the recognitions of Clement, because that's what it's popularly known as. However, the Clement is just the person who wrote the document. The person who's doing most of the speaking and doing the teachings that are in this document is Peter. And you could call it the Acts of Peter, really. So why did they name it the Recognitions of Clement? Well, probably because if you see a document that's called the Recognitions of Clement, you're less likely to read it. Whereas if it says something like the Acts of Peter, then you might be more likely to read it. Now, I went with the title, The Nazarene Acts of the Apostles, because this is one that was already in use at the time. Other people have referred to it as the Nazarene Acts. So instead of coming up with a title completely on my own, I just went with what was already there. But the point is, of course, if you want to read any papers that are written about it in a scholarly setting, it's going to be referred to as the Recognitions of Clement, even though I believe that title is misleading. And if you want one that actually captures the meaning of the text and the meaning of the document itself, the Nazarene Acts is a much more accurate title, in my opinion. So, and initially, just this starts off with the introduction of Clement to the early assembly. It explains how he got interested in the doctrines and teachings of Yeshua of Nazareth, how he was introduced to Peter, and then it goes on there with the teachings of Peter. So this, of course, is going to start off. It's going to be about Clement's personal experiences. It says, "I, Clement, who was born in the city of Rome, was from my earliest age a lover of chastity, while the bend of my mind held me bound as with chains of anxiety and sorrow. For a thought that was in me, whence originating I cannot tell, constantly led me to think of my condition of mortality, and to discuss such questions as these: whether there be for me any life after death, or whether I am to be wholly annihilated, whether I did not exist before I was born, and whether there shall be no remembrance of this life after death. And so the boundlessness of time shall consign all things to oblivion and silence, so that not only we shall cease to be, but there shall be no remembrance that we have ever been. This also I revolved in my mind, when the world was made, or what was before it was made, or whether it has existed from eternity. For it seemed certain that if it had been made, it must be doomed to dissolution, and if it be dissolved, what is to be afterwards? Unless perhaps all things shall be buried in oblivion and silence, or something shall be which the mind of man cannot now conceive." So I think all of these are questions we've probably all asked ourselves at some point or another. Clement was essentially seeking after knowledge of God, knowledge of what God's plan is and what the future holds, life after death, that sort of thing. "When I was continually revolving in my mind these and such like questions, suggested I know not how, I was pining away wonderfully through excess of grief. And what was worse, if at any time I thought to cast aside such cares as being of little use, the waves of anxiety rose all the higher within me. For I had in me that most excellent companion who would not suffer me to rest, the desire of immortality. For, as a subsequent issue showed, and the grace of Almighty God directed, this bent of mind led me to the quest of truth and the acknowledgement of the true light, and hence it came to pass that ere long I pitied those whom formerly in my ignorance I believed to be happy. I've spent the last couple of weeks, I was trying to do an introduction to the Nazarene Acts, and it ended up being more of a history of myself and my own interactions with God and the development of my spiritual journey. And I haven't actually posted the video yet. I don't know. I'm considering whether to or not, because I do discuss some things that are kind of personal in there, and I don't know if I really want to put that on the internet. But some of what Clement is going through now makes me think of when I was younger. When I was a kid, I would hear the voice of God. And it wasn't until I got much older that I realized that it was God speaking to me. I initially thought it was my own thoughts. And when I read what Clement says here about, for I had in me the most excellent companion who would not suffer me to rest, and he says it was the desire of immortality, I kind of associate that with what I went through. Like, I had this voice that would just not allow me to rest. It pushed me to pursue truth, especially when I got older. And I'm wondering if what Clement is actually saying here is that he was hearing the voice of God, and it was God leading him forward in this journey, because that's what it sounds like to me. It sounds like he went through a period very similar to myself, where God was speaking to him, and he didn't really recognize it as being God. He thought it was something within himself, part of his own psyche, part of his own mind, that was pushing him toward this, when in reality it was God kind of prodding you forward and asking the right questions to get you to start asking those questions. Having therefore such a bend of mind from my earliest years, the desire of learning something led me to the frequent schools of the philosophers. There I saw that naught else was done, save the doctrines were asserted and controverted without end. Contests were waged, and the arts of syllogisms and the subtleties of conclusions were discussed. If at any time the doctrine of the immortality of the soul prevailed, I was thankful. If at any time it was impugned, I went away sorrowful. Still, neither doctrine had the power of truth over my heart. This only I understood, that opinions and definitions of things were accounted true or false, not in accordance with their nature and the truth of the arguments, but in proportion to the talents of those who supported them. And I was all the more tortured in the bottom of my heart, because I was neither able to lay hold of any of those things which were spoken as firmly established, nor was I able to lay aside the desire of inquiry. But the more I endeavored to neglect and despise them, so much the more eagerly, as I have said, did a desire of this sort creeping in upon me, as with a kind of pleasure, take possession of my heart and mind. This is something that I have to say that I agree with. You can watch debates, but you're not necessarily going to find truth. There are tactics within debates where the person who has the truth is made to seem like he doesn't. And some of these more obvious tactics involve ridicule or creating like a straw man argument, and so the person who is pushing the falsehood will create a straw man argument, which means he's basically creating another argument that his opponent is not necessarily advocating for, and then he almost challenges his opponent to defend this straw man that he made up, which his opponent's not even advocating for in the first place. And there's, of course, appeal to authority and all these various logical fallacies that are used in debates to steer you away from hearing the truth. When somebody can't win the debate by honest means, they tend to misdirect you. And that's really what Clement is talking about here. Because, whoever wins the debate is usually not the person who has the true argument. It's the person who's just better at debating. So it's not really about true or false. It's about whoever has the most skill. And a lot of the people who would debate topics such as this, with regards to the true faith of the Nazarenes versus the false religious system created by the Pauline Church, usually the person that you're debating is going to be someone who they're there to just defend their position. There's this tendency of people who are really just apologists for the church to present themselves as if they're scholars. But there's a difference between being an apologist and being a scholar. A scholar seeks after the truth. An apologist just wants to find the sources that support their belief. And so knowing the difference between the two before you go into the debate is important. Because the apologist generally they'll do things like attack the person making the other debate, or they'll just their opponent will bring forth some truth and they'll just be like, oh, that's not true. They want to argue over the meaning of words and such, and they act as if they're a scholar who understands the Greek, when in reality they're just defending their religious practices. It has nothing to do with truth. It just has to do with them wanting to protect their beliefs. Being therefore straitened in the discovery of things, I said to myself, why do we labor in vain, since the end of things is manifest? For if after death I shall be no more, my present torture is useless. But if there is to be for me a life after death, let us keep for that life the excitements that belong to it, lest perhaps some sadder things befall me than those which I now suffer, unless I shall have lived piously and soberly, and according to the opinions of some of the philosophers, I be consigned to the stream of dark rolling Phlegethon, or to Tartarus, like Sisyphus and Tydeus, and to eternal punishment in the infernal regions like Ixion and Tantalus. And again, I would answer to myself, but these things are fables. Or, if it be so, since the matter is in doubt, it is better to live piously. So, in other words, should I live piously to be able to obtain the reward of the righteous? Or is that a waste of time? And I would be better off to just enjoy life while I have it. Because what if I live piously, but then at the end of time, there's nothing after life. It's just a void, death. But then again, if I live unrighteously, then I'm going to be punished. And so he wants to know, which is true. But again, I would ponder with myself, how should I restrain myself from the lust of sin while uncertain as to the reward of righteousness? And all the more when I have no certainty what righteousness is, or what is pleasing to God. And when I cannot ascertain whether the soul be immortal and be such that it has anything to hope for, nor do I know what the future is certainly to be. Yet still I cannot rest from thoughts of this sort. So again, these are good questions. I think this is a great introduction Clement's journey, this should be really the introduction to our journey. He says he has no idea what righteousness is or what is pleasing to God, and I think that should be our goal. Many believers today think the goal is to just understand the Bible. That's not it. It's to understand God. Or we have to read the Bible to get the answers that align with what we already believe, which is really what I was saying about the apologists. They just want to find the evidence to support their beliefs. They don't want to find the truth. Clement is taking a more correct approach. He, first of all, wants to know what is righteousness, and secondly, what is pleasing to God, because you have to have these two understandings to know what to do. It's not about knowing what is pleasing to a book, to the Bible. It's about what does God really want. What then shall I do? This shall I do. I shall proceed to Egypt, and there I shall cultivate the friendship of the hierophants, or prophets who preside at the shrines. Then I shall win over a magician by money, and entreat him by what they call the necromantic art, to bring me a soul from the infernal regions, as if I were desirous of consulting it about some business. But this shall be my consultation, whether the soul be immortal. Now the proof that the soul is immortal will be put to past doubt, not from what it says or from what I hear, but from what I see. For seeing it with my eyes, I shall ever after hold the surest conviction of its immortality, and no fallacy of words or uncertainty of hearing shall ever be able to disturb the persuasion produced by sight. In other words, if I see a soul conjured up from the nether regions, then I shall know that obviously souls are immortal. And that question at least will be answered. However, I related this project to a certain philosopher with whom I was intimate, who counseled me not to venture upon it, because, said he, if the soul should not obey the call of the magician, you henceforth will live more hopelessly, as thinking that there is nothing after death, and also as having tried things unlawful. If, however, you seem to see anything, what religion or what piety can arise to you from things that are unlawful and impious? For they say that transactions of this sort are hateful to the divinity, and that God sets himself in opposition to those who trouble the souls after they're released from the body. And that's true. Like, you can't do something unrighteous like necromancy and think that that's going to get you closer to God. When I heard this, I was indeed staggered in my purpose, yet I could not in any way either lay aside my longing or cast off the distressing thought. Not to make a long story of it, while I was tossed upon these billows of my thought, a certain report, which took its rise from the regions of the east during the reign of Tiberius Caesar, gradually reached us, and gaining strength as it passed through every place like some good message sent from God, it was filling the whole world, and suffered not the divine will to be concealed in silence. For it was spread over all places, announcing that there was a certain person in Judea, who, beginning in the springtime, was preaching the kingdom of God to the Judeans, and saying that those should receive it who should observe the ordinances of his commandments and his doctrine, and that his speech might be believed to be worthy of credit and full of the divinity. He said to perform many mighty works and wondrous signs and prodigies by his mere word, so that, as one having power from God, he made the deaf to hear, and the blind to see, and the lame to stand erect, and expelled every infirmity and all demons from men. Yea, that he even raised dead persons who were brought to him, that he cured lepers also, looking at them from a distance, and that there was absolutely nothing which seemed impossible to him. These and such like things were confirmed in process of time, not now by frequent rumors, but by the plain statements of persons coming from those quarters, and day by day the truth of the matter was further disclosed. So he's beginning to hear rumors and information about Yeshua and the miracles he was working in Judea. And so I think this is a good place to stop, and we will pick it up next time at the beginning of chapter 7 here in the first book of the Nazarene Acts. So thank you for listening. Shalom.